So next we've got to support actually closing this pop-up now, so this expander. We can currently open it, but we can't close it. So we mentioned to do that, we already had the features in here. It was via this kind of backdrop. So all we need to do now is inject this backdrop, but inside the animated pop-up itself, so we don't have to deal with this manually. So let's first go into the animated pop-up, and we'll create another private member. And this will be the backdrop, so we'll just call this underlay control. The underlay control for closing this pop-up. And we'll just make this once in the constructor. So we'll go down to constructor. And in here, we will make a new underlay control. And that just wants to be a border. And then start off as false as visible. So that will be that. The background transparent, we're just going to set it to red for now, just so we can see it. And then we'll change that to transparent after, and the Z index for now we'll fix to 9. Again, keep it nice and simple. We could get the Z index from this control and then bind it to, -1 from that, but for now let's just keep it simple. Now we need a pointer pressed event. And we'll just do that for how simple it is. If I can actually get IntelliSense to work. Right, it does me head in sometimes with IntelliSense. Not as good as Visual Studio. There we go, finally. So when we press the pointer, all we need to do is begin close, which is the same as calling the close command. We don't need to actually call the command, we can just call begin close on press close pop-up. And then the only thing we need to do then to mimic this behavior now is to set the row span and column span to whatever the grid is. So we remove that for now. We need to define a point when we are going to inject this into what is presumably at the minute a grid, which will support multiple parents, but for now, as we mentioned before, we'll just support one. So where do we want to inject this? Well, we want to inject it when the controller is fully open. So we need to determine when it's fully open and what we do when things are currently in an open or closed state to kind of transition between the two finished states. So we have that in theory in a few places. We basically have it here as a final state and here. So we've got duplicate code as well, if you see. So let's move this kind of position here to a new method, and we'll call this a animation complete. And we'll just move that into a new method. And now we just need to make that method, so I'll just make it here. And now this should fire. Should be called when an open or close transition has complete. So this should be the only place when we finish an open and a close. Let's just see if that works for the minute. So we should get this straight away from the fact that it starts closed. You can see we're not getting it already. So let's just restart and see. And it's the first animation. Does that. Have we got... Okay, just breakpoints aren't working apparently. Okay, run that again. Okay, as soon as I breakpoint, it decides it is going to honor that breakpoint. So yeah, that is running when we hit a close. And let's just run an open, and then we hit it on open. So that's right. That's what we want now. So really we want to split these two up now, because we're not just going to set the width or the height, we're going to do things. So we'll have one command for if we are opening. And another if we are closed. If we're opening, we'll set the width to desired width.width, and the height to desired width.height. Desired size.height rather. And then the other state, we set it to 0. So that's now mimicked this behavior, but we now have open sets to do different things. If open, if closed. Set size to desired size. Set size to 0. So what we want to do is, when we are fully open, we now want to inject the underlay. And we can only do this if the parent for now is a grid. So we'll say if parent is grid, and if it is, give it a variable named grid. And then if it is grid, what do we now want to do? We want to do grid.children .insert at 0 index, and we want to insert the underlay control. Insert the underlay control, and when we want to remove it is when we're fully closed. We also need to set the underlay control that is visible to true. Show underlay, and then inject it. And on close, we just need to remove, and we're not going to make a presumption that it's in the grid because it could close before it's ever been opened. So we need to do if grid.children, or first if the parent is a grid, then if grid.children.contains the underlay, then we can remove the underlay. If the parent is a grid, remove underlay. If the parent is a grid, show underlay and insert. So I think with that, we should get the underlay appearing and disappearing. You can see that it appears in red, and if we click it, it hides the control. So we now have the underlay appearing and being dynamically injected when ready, and removed when done. And the only thing left here now is we need to set the attached properties for grid row span and column span to match the current grid. So set grid row column span. So to do that, we just use set value, and now we can get the grid dot row span property as the property we want to set, and the value we can actually go to the grid itself, get the row definitions if it has them, because it might not have them, and get the count. And if it doesn't have them, set it to 1, because you don't want to span 0 controls, you want to span at least 1. If we do that for the column span as well, we should now get the underlay being injected and automatically spanning effectively the entire grid. Index.bounds must not be non-negative. And I wonder if it's actually this 0 because we don't have any column definitions. So let's try just setting it to 0 by default. That might make it not work though, I don't know. And if so, we could actually check if it's 0. Yes, that's going to complain. So perhaps we need to check if grid.rowDefinitions.count is greater than 0. Then do this. And we might only want to set the value if we have one. So if there are definitions. Let's see if that was the issue. I'm pretty sure you use set value to set the attached property. Yes, that was the issue. So you can see now we expand and then the clicker closes. So all we need to do to complete that is to change the red to transparent. And now we have an invisible, click anywhere kind of grid. You could also do, I don't know, brushes.black and opacity equals 0.2, something like that, and give it like a fade. Now it's going to be a bit harsh saying that, it's going to just appear at the minute because there's no transitions. But you know, you can have like an overlay like that, which looks kind of good, but we'd want to fade that in. So we could do the fade in by, instead of doing as visible as false, you could do opacity is 0, and instead of is visible as true, you can do .opacity equals 0.2. And if we add the right animation transitions to this, we should be able to get that to just naturally animate in. And then on close, we've removed it, but we also want to reset here. Reset opacity, otherwise it won't fade in the next time. So opacity, and you could have the opacity being faded in on the start of an animation to start opening, which I think would look better because then as you click the button it starts to fade that background in. So instead of doing that here, we have an open property, I believe. So we have this open property here. So long as we honor setting the open through this, we can now do actions in here. And that would be, for example, if the value, which is the thing it's been set to, is true by just doing this value. So if we're opening, if we are opening, we can now just show underlay, or in this case we might as well say fade in underlay. And that will start the animation the minute the opening animation starts as well. So we just need to now set, well, let's first check that runs. That'll just run and instantly show as soon as we click the button. Although it seems to not. Begin open, open is true. And it doesn't because we don't inject it at that point, that's why. So the insert, again here at the start, this entire kind of section here can be, does it want to be in the open instead? Yeah, this can all be moved to the open command. Whereas the close, you want it to do it once it's fully closed. So we just move that opacity to here. And now everything happens when we set it open. It checks the grid, it finds it, it injects it. So now it should appear as soon as we click the button. So there you go. So now all that's left is to animate that in. So we can do that in the constructor. And all we need for that is transitions, I believe. We've set the opacity, and I'm wondering whether transitions work in the background saying that in code behind, but we'll soon find out. And this wants to be a double transition. Property is, what property is this? Control.opacity, is it on? Yep, opacity property. And duration equals time span dot from seconds 1. Easing equals quadratic ease in out. And delay, we don't want any. So I think if everything goes to plan there, and the code behind works for transitions, which I think it will, or not. So I'll tell you what anyway, thinking about that, we don't really want to just set the opacity directly, because we animate this control itself. We have an animation timer and we have a ticker already. So instead of just setting the opacity to equal 0.2 like this, we will fade it on the actual animation. So we'll just blend it in with the animation. So for that, then we just need to go to where we normally set the width equals the final size here, do our animation, animate underlay. So if we are opening, well, actually, it doesn't really matter. Animate underlay for opening and closing, so just animate the underlay. To do that, we just do underlay.opacity equals, and we just need to calculate it based on this size here. So that's the percentage we are all the way through the animation, regardless forward or backwards. And you just want to times 0.2 by that, the complete amount of transition that you want. So that should, I think, be all we need to make this animate, and we don't even need... There you go, look at that. So using the same animation loop, we have this background nicely fading in and out. That's a really nice effect. We could also expand this opacity, background opacity, to a property, which we probably should. So we already have a property for open, which is a direct property. We have animation time, and we might as well have here a direct property, and it can be called underlay opacity. That's a double, and that's that. And the default property is 0.2. Wrap that in a region. Build that, and we should, I think it all works in the viewer. It should work in this UI here. Yep. So by doing that now, we should be able to say underlay opacity, let's do 1. And update the code, that would help. 0.2, so now we just do underlay opacity. And there we have, we can get a complete cover, or we can set it to a specific value we like. Kind of like where we had it, to be honest, 0.2, so we don't need to specify that. So that's now got rid of the need to have the underlay here manually in or linking to anything. As well as we've added this nice kind of animation, so if we take longer to animate, say this takes 3.3 seconds, the backdrop's now going to fully animate in for 3 seconds and match the actual control. Now interestingly, I think, and this might fail, if we click midway we should be able to close it from the point at which it's currently opening. Look at that. So we even have midway support for transitions. starts opening, close it. And that's that feature supported. Next up, I think we will add the actual content inside of this control. This kind of expandable and collapsible control. And we're going to have to make our pop-up support variable widths and heights. But that's it for this one, guys. I hope you learned something, and I'll catch you in the next.